So thanks for those of you who are here for not going home yet. I'm Lucas Patingre. I work as an Alfresco consultant and technical lead at Zaizi in London. And I'll be talking about scaling the auditing in Alfresco and potentially the reporting as well using NoSQL architecture. In our case, it will be Elasticsearch. So I'll start by putting some context in there. Why did we come up with that solution? What does it solve? What do you get out of it? I'll describe a bit then how Alfresco Audit currently work, the parts that are really good about it, the parts that are a bit less good and we try to address with that solution. And then I'll describe what we did to solve it and what you could do yourself to solve it with your own installation if you face the same problems. I'll describe the benefits of it, what you get out of it, out of that work, and we'll expand on the architecture because we'll come up with a whole new architecture and that actually have really good benefits to integrate with other stuff that is not directly Alfresco related, but we can take advantage of. So I'll give a few leads here and then I'll expand on going forward what it will make that solution and Alfresco 5, because as you've seen, Alfresco 5 got a lot of reporting, really cool stuff that is coming. So we'll see how it will go together. So first of all, why did we address auditing? So as I said, I work at Zaizi. We've been growing tremendously lately, and so is the side of the project we've worked on. And with growth goes scaling. And as we've been working on bigger and bigger projects, scaling was not an option. It had to be there. It had to be implemented and well thought. And we've been working, part of it, with government companies, with government or other companies for whom auditing is not an option either. So we had to get these two to work well together. So scaling the audit. So what is audit in the scope of Alfresco? For you who haven't worked with the auditing yet, basically it's just three things. It's to know every time something was done, we need to know when it was done exactly, by whom, and so we can potentially, it's probably not readable from the back of the room, but add as many information as we want. So we might want to store the username, but we might want to store the permission that user had at the time. We might want to store all the groups that user belongs to if it's relevant to your use case. And then we want to store the action, obviously, with as much precision as we want and as we can. So if the action is copying a node from another node, obviously we want to know what was the source node we copied from. If the action was to move the node, we need the same kind of property, but if it was to create a node, the source node has absolutely no significance. So the data and the details you'll store will depend a lot on the action, but depending on the action, we really want to store a lot of information that could be useful. So how does auditing work currently in Alfresco? And the main takeaway here, and the main reason of this limitation, is that it is storing all the data in the exact same database as you got everything else in Alfresco. All your workflow in your database, all your node, your properties in your database, and the audit, which potentially output a tremendous amount of information, is shared in that same database. So that is from the Alfresco wiki. That is basically how the audit works. So you got data producers, so you got a lot of events that captures the actions that you do. And with the audit service, you will grab the configuration of your audit. So we'll see that a bit later. It's configured through XML. Really easy to configure, to add new configuration, new things to audit. Then it's all packed up in that audit component that can perform various actions, but will ultimately store all those data that it records in that same database. So we can easily see how it can be a choke point, both for the audit and for the core application itself. So that's one of the ways audit can be quickly retrieved. There's the Alfresco dashlet, there's community module, part of Share Extra. You can quickly see you configure the application, so there are several audit applications. You can define your own. Alfresco Access is a default one for all the actions on the node and more. And so if you configure for Alfresco Access, you'll get something like that. So each audit action with the user, when it was performed, and all the details of that action. So in that case, it was a read. It was on a node of type CM content. It will tell you which node was read, etc. So you can see quickly it's a lot of information. And that is that exact same structure in the database. So in the database, it will show up like that. So for each event, you got the time, you got the user, and you got the application that recorded that event, and then you'll got the different properties that belongs to that event. And as you can see here, it's quite a few lines because the query actually that I did write to obtain this, something like that. And that is a simplified version of the one Alfresco themselves uses in their MyBatis mapping, which has a few more tables for the properties. I simplified it here, but as you can see, it uses a lot of tables. So basically, I retrieve the audit entry, then I need to do two joins in order to go and retrieve the users, then 3 joins to go and retrieve the name of the applications, then I go for 3 more joins, and that's where it's simplified to get the different values of that audit. So here I simplified, assuming everything was a string. It can potentially be dates, it can potentially, and all those are different tables for the different type of properties. So as you can see, just retrieving audit entries goes through a lot of table, takes a lot of time, and inserting audit entries goes through all these tables as well. So that's really what causes it to be a choke point. Another thing that I want to display quickly, in good actually, because it's something we will keep and expand on. If you have the records management identified, you'll see that one action that is view audit log, and that will show something like that. So it will show you for the current document you're executing the action on, all the actions that were made, all the actions that were audited. So in our case, it was created as a record, then it was filed as a record. So it's really important for records management, because here is the core of our application, what we really want to track. But we want to be more ambitious and track with a better performance, more documents. So we actually built a whole new system. For those of you who've looked at the analytics solution that Alfresco did, we have things similar in the fact that we externalize the data, but I'll come back more on it later. But it is based on several open source components. And here is the goal that we set before going for it. So we wanted to make the audit scale without hindering Alfresco. So if we get more data in the audit, let's audit more, let's query it in more different way, like a lot of statistics. We don't want it to slow down Alfresco. But we still want to keep the queries fast. So if we store it too far away, we got bad timing, etc. The queries, any query to retrieve the audit, to retrieve statistics will be incredibly slow. That's something we definitely want to avoid. And we don't want too much delay until it's stored. When you do an action, it's actually, there's a cron job that only runs every 10 minutes and you only get your 10 or more and you only get your action afterwards. A user for whom auditing is really important, if you think government, if you think really serious companies that really want to keep track of everything that happened on their document, they'll go there, they'll say, oh, I read the document and I download it, and now I see the audit log and nothing is there. Okay, I don't believe in your solution, just go away. So we want it to be tracked fast and be able to be searched quickly as well. And as much as possible, we'd like it backward compatible with Alfresco's default implementation. So not break the existing view audit log for the records management that we actually think is really good. And we would like it to be really well integrated, to have a similar look and feel that the user can browse instinctively inside Alfresco and find what they want. So in the end, if it can help you for the non-technical here, we went a bit with the same approach that Alfresco did for the search. So you remember before Alfresco 4, so you had all the search that was going with Lucene. Lucene was embedded into Alfresco, so all their performance were tightly coupled. And it had limited inspection tools. So you could go through the nav browser in the admin console, run some search queries. You could inspect the index with Luke, for example, but you need to install it, and that's really developer only. And then it went to Solar. Solar is externalized. You can put it in a different server than your Alfresco. You can cluster it so that it scales on its own. And starting Alfresco 5, you'll get a really better administration console. So you already have an administration console with the Solar that exists, which is Solar 1.4. But Alfresco 5 upgrade to Solar 4, and the administration console, if you haven't looked at it, I strongly advise you to do it, because it's totally different and it's actually really useful. So here is what we went for. So you'll recognize the top components, obviously, which is the default Alfresco things that we really liked, all the system of events that capture everything, all the way that you configure new things to audit. That is something we kept, that is something we like, and we kept in our solution. But then instead of going to the Alfresco database, we log everything to file. We have locally a file that is audit.log that we log to it with syslog. And I'll present all the components one by one in more detail afterwards. But we log it locally, and then we got Logstash that just come in, takes all the changes, and injects them into Elasticsearch, or potentially an Elasticsearch cluster. And here is where the information is stored. So when Alfresco requests all that information to query for audit data, it will query directly Elasticsearch. And then we added Kibana to our set of tools. That one is actually not mandatory. It would work without, but it's a really good monitoring tool and to have graphs and a good view of what data is stored in Elasticsearch. We actually recommend putting that in. So first of all, syslog and logging to file in general. So we went for it using syslog because it's standard, it's efficient, it's easy to use in Java, and it's actually quite performant for your file not to become too big. You can put a file rotation. You just have to configure all this. Once it's on file, you can re-index retake your data and re-inject it into Elasticsearch. But more importantly, really more importantly, is to lighten the weight on the database. So where before, every time you did an action, before it's actually all taken into account, it had to execute all that set of insertion in all those different tables. Right now, you don't need it anymore. You just dump it to file, and as soon as it's in the file, it's safe. You know you'll be able to retrieve it. You know that data will not be lost. Whatever happens afterwards, that data is safe, stored, and it goes way faster to just dump it to file. So then that's where Logstash come in. So Logstash is open source. It is actually built to handle log files, which is what we want here, mainly to retrieve the data in our audit.log file, but potentially other purpose, which I'll describe later with the OSEG. But if you can use that same Logstash to grab different log and enrich all the set of data you got in Elasticsearch, then that's definitely a win, because we already put that in the architecture. Another reason for Logstash is that it's really convenient in our case, because when we dump the data to file, we dump them into JSON format, and Logstash already has out of the box a JSON input connector, and then we push it all into Elasticsearch, and Logstash out of the box has an output connector for Elasticsearch, so really convenient. So as you guess, the next one is Elasticsearch, obviously. Elasticsearch is the NoSQL part of the title of that talk. So that's really important here. That is open source. It can scale really well. So you don't have to bother about that whole load balancer, just scaling, adding more server, etc. Actually, in Java, you connect with it with a library that Elasticsearch gives you, where you just signal it, and it will automatically pick it up. It's really convenient to use. And so obviously, from Alfresco, we can easily query Elasticsearch through the use of that Java library. And Kibana, as I said, is a non-mandatory part of the architecture. It could work without, but come on, who doesn't like graphs anyway? That's open source. You can easily install it, configure it to go with Elasticsearch, and then it's totally impossible for you to read, but you select whichever action you want. So you got the create, you got every time a document was created, every time it was read, every time it was downloaded. You select which action you want to monitor and quickly get it put into graphs, good visibility. So it's definitely a good addition to that solution. So how was it implemented? I'll quickly insist on the Alfresco part, because after all, that's the Alfresco Summit. So I'll start with overriding the audit component. For those of you who know Spring, sorry for the non-technical, I'll start showing code, but there are pretty colors, so you'll be fine. For those of you who know Spring, that's how you inject all the Java classes in there, all the Java classes in Alfresco. And so to override the default component that was logging everything to database, we just need to create another Spring bin instead that points to our own personal class that we created. We just inject one more property, which is our auditing service. And we're done. The bin being the same name, it overrides it. It will be automatically picked up as a dependency by all the other classes who used it. And there's actually not much more to do here. And inside that same component, there are a few things we changed, but mainly the heart of it is really this. Instead of going and use the audit DAO, which is the one logging to database, we go and log with our personal service that will automatically trigger the following actions. So I won't put the code here, it just won't fit, but basically it just creates the JSON that we're gonna dump with the details of that action. As much as possible, as much as configured actually. And then it will have a standard method to add everything that is non-action related, but that we still want. So what time it was done, what user did it, that is also configured. And then it will quickly configure the logger through Log4j to log using syslog to our audit.log file if it's not configured yet. And then it will just dump the result to file. If everything goes well, doesn't need to be anything more here. So that was already simplified. Then if you really want something robust, if you really want something that you can use, you'll have to add stuff around. For example, add a job that will pull for the syslog availability. If syslog is down or crashed, you cannot audit anymore. So what we chose to do, if syslog is not available anymore for some time, we just switch the whole Alfresco system into read-only mode so that no action can go unaudited. And as soon as syslog is restarted, is available again, etc., we, of course, re-enable the whole repo and the whole write permissions on it. So that's a decision we took, which definitely make it so that we avoid losing auditing information. That is non-key to the system. It would work without, but really if you want coherence in what you audit, that's definitely something you should consider adding to the solution as well. And And then, yeah, quality of life improvements. So you can toggle it on off, being, no, I want to use the Alfresco default, I want to use the log2 file, I want to use both in parallel, which depending on your use case might be recommended or not, hopefully not. And then availability through JMX, so through JMX being able to change different things, to see what's going through, etc. All that is a bit of extra code, not really exciting. So I put it there because it's a functionality you want to think about if you actually want to implement it yourself. But yeah, non-core to the solution. So that was the first half. It's how to intercept in order to log it into Elasticsearch. And then the second half is how to change the audit queries in order to fetch from Elasticsearch instead of the database. So that's the second half that we extend. What we went for was using our custom web script, custom service. It will just go directly and fetch it into Elasticsearch. So out of the three components, you got Elasticsearch, you got Alfresco that just got those two components, and share for the audit reports, for example, that I'll show a bit later, the different audit actions, view audit logs, etc. So the approach we took for our solution was to actually create new services here instead of extending the existing one, and then extend the share side to point to those new services instead of the old one. So that is depending on our use case, actually, because we wanted to extend the share side to add some more support for errors. So instead of just saying, oh, it fails to error, it just fails to add a file, we want to say, oh, Elasticsearch was done, you cannot view the audit now, contact your admin, try again in a few minutes, etc. So we ended up extending the share side for it. And so the share side, when you go in audit.get.js, so that's JavaScript, because JavaScript is awesome, you'll just have your different URIs that pointed initially to the Alfresco services, and you'll point it to your new services. But that is a decision we took. Depending on your use cases, you might actually want to extend the Alfresco side of it and keep the share untouched. You'll lose a bit of information that you return to the client, but you'll be only extended Alfresco, which can also be a good decision. So, yeah, that was not just a cool nerd project, so I could code something I like. There are actually real-life repercussions for clients, and so what do we get if we get to do all that work and add all that? And the key thing here is performance and stability. The fact that it's asynchronous. So as soon as you dump it to the log, you won't have to roll back. That information is safe, so you'll just never have to roll back anything, or that information is just there. So it's just non-blocking, and dumping it to a file is faster than storing it into Alfresco. Into the Alfresco database, it won't conflict with other processes that might be trying to log it into the Alfresco database at the same time, and it won't make the Alfresco database size explode as well. And another key thing here is that both of them are independent. If the audit falls, Alfresco keep running. Depending on what part it is, if it's Logstash, it will run in read-only, but it's still accessible. If it's syslog, my bad. If it's Logstash, actually, we don't care. It will delay the time where the audit data will be integrated and will be available to the user. But as soon as we logged it to file, we are safe, our information is there, and so we can keep Alfresco running, read, write, no worries. And that's actually true the other way around. If Alfresco falls, it doesn't prevent us to consult Elasticsearch for the audit data through Kibana, for example, that we added to the architecture before. So you can get reports, you can get whatever you want through third applications that would consult directly Elasticsearch. And so, Yeah, really the key thing that initially prompted that whole solution is that we'll totally relieve the database out of all that stress that is the audit.log. So much that, if you remember, that is the one we had in the records management only, because we tried before in Alfresco not to put too much stress on the audit. Well, now we just added it for all the files because we're confident that we can scale. So it's all in Elasticsearch and we can just query it without hindering Alfresco. So why not offer that possibility, that visibility of the actions that were performed for every document, be it records or simple documents. So that's something that you can do, as well as statistics. It might look pale according to all the new things revealed by Alfresco, and that is something that will definitely rework once we'll go to Alfresco 5. That's not actually what the solution was about, but just once again to show that since we got all that data that is readily available independently from Alfresco, we can just query it again across. No risk for performance of Alfresco. If there are a lot of reports that you need, you'll scale Elasticsearch. But there's no real threat to Alfresco here. So you can get reports out of it. These are reports that were needed in our case. We don't have the cool, fancy report creation UI that Alfresco got, but we'll definitely want to integrate with it later. So what about the architecture now? So I presented the architecture. I mentioned stuff earlier that we would be able to expand on the architecture. One of the use cases is this. So yeah, by the way, quick parenthesis, that is how you configure new entries for the auditing in Alfresco through XML. You just configure it this way, and it will be picked up by the auditing component when it fetches the configuration. That is actually quite modular and quite useful, so we reused it. But my point for putting it here, it's something that I overlooked so far in my presentation. The auditing, I focused on auditing on the actions that are performed on the nodes, but you can also audit for security all the logins. So a user managed to log in, a user failed to log in, a user logged out, etc. And so once again, it might not be readable here. That's a short extract of the audit dashlet, but you can see that here the user admin tried to log in and failed. The user admin tried to log in and failed. The user admin tried to log in and failed. The user admin plus some SQL ingestion tried to log in and failed. And then the user admin succeeded to log in. Well, that might be something you want to worry about, and that's definitely something that you can start looking into if you have all that information available. So I'll quickly introduce OSSEC. Once again, open source. It would be, it's an open source intrusion detection system that once again is based on logs. So you'd install it in a standalone server. You'll configure it to pick up the logs from several different servers. So you'll configure it to pick up the logs all you want from your software, from the OS. Everything that is logged with syslog can just be retrieved by OSSEC, by your antivirus, depending on your server. You configure it this way. And once again, OSSEC by default can send you email of alerts, etc. But something we really like, it also produces a log of all the alerts. And who says log says that we can just grab it with Logstash. So I added a few components. I simplified the Alfresco bit. I introduced a proxy, for example. If you have a proxy in your application, you could have a web front end, etc. I didn't want to overly complexify, but you would have OSSEC that stand over there in his own server, and that would just look at the proxy. If it's Nginx, if it's Apache, they all release logs of the access, etc. Same for Alfresco, the Alfresco logs, the database log. It can pick up as well who tried to log in via SSH through those machines. It can pick up a lot of things, and then it will aggregate all that, just try to find 10 attempts of intrusions in all the systems. And it will, as I said, alert you and produce the logs of the alert that you can get Logstash to listen on and inject in Elasticsearch as well. And you can get reports out of Kibana or even in Alfresco if you want Alfresco administrator to quickly look at the very worrying things that happened without having the use for a sysadmin. Well, you could, providing some extra work, just have a display here as well. Or any third parties that just tap into Elasticsearch once again. So that's really something that once you got all that architecture in place, you can add those extra things in there because these are standard, well-recognized open source components, and you can just expand on it with whatever idea you got. So going forward, I don't know about you, but to me, one of the big stories of that summit was Alfresco 5. Lots of promising stuff. And part of it that overlapped with that presentation, which would be the whole reports idea. So do the whole new architecture of reports actually render all that solution obsolete and just useless because the reports are already there and improve on the auditing? Well, the obvious answer is no, otherwise I wouldn't have been invited to talk here. So here is quickly how Alfresco's solution happened. So the key point is that you still log everything in Alfresco's database. And then you got Kettle that come in. Kettle is some ETL, so it's just a job that will extract the data from Alfresco, that will transform it and inject it into a data mart. So in our case, Pentaho. Well, in Alfresco's case, Pentaho. And then Alfresco will be querying Pentaho to get all this data. So you can see some things are similar, and actually half of the story is similar. That one. Alfresco, in order to get better performance, to get all those graphs, couldn't just rely on the database. It's just way too much stress on the database, so that wouldn't work. So they externalize everything in a Pentaho that also have some good reporting capability. But the part right here is still one of the main problems that we wanted to address. Everything is still stored in Alfresco database before being exported to Pentaho. And so you still have, with each insertion, several tables that you need to insert in, etc. So the problems still remain. For the reporting capability, as I said before, that's definitely something we'll have to work on our tool when Alfresco 5 Enterprise will be out to see how we can integrate with it and have better reporting capability ourselves, see how we can go with those reporting capabilities. But yeah, I think the current solution, if you want to implement it, still has some space and still has some use. So that is about you. I think Alfresco is in the right way, but not all the way there yet. So for those who fell asleep in the middle or have some accounting to do to their boss saying that they actually attended the presentation, here is some kind of intellectual doggy bag. What you should take away if you couldn't get the whole of it. In general, what you get out of it, you get a lot of open source products that we added here. So we believe in open source, we're open source enthusiasts, and we won't force proprietary closed source software on you. If you want to replace some of those components, but your favorite closed source is definitely something you can do. But in our solution, we use as many open source products as we could. And you got a lot of scaling potential, both for the Alfresco audit and for external things that you can plug into this architecture like OSSEC. You still got a reasonable amount of Alfresco customization. The few code I showed wasn't all we used, obviously. We have reasonable amount of it. But that is the good point. I'm talking for most of you for Alfresco developers, and I'll actually skip the little for now. And we got no code for the other technology. So it's configuration, getting them to scale, to talk together, to integrate all together. But you have no code for this. So if you have a good sysadmin, and then some Alfresco developer competencies, then you can go ahead with it. It will take time to implement it, but that's definitely some journey you could take if you wanted to. And so we tried, as mentioned, is a challenge to get as little modification to the Alfresco UI as possible. So we added stuff, but it's all intuitive for the user. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering how some stuff works when you swap out writing the audit log to the database to write it to a file. So if I'm creating a node, updating another node, and deleting a third node, and the third node, when I delete, is crashes of the transaction is rolling back. So what happens with the audit log then? Is it that component where you put in, is it writing of the transaction commit, or when does it write?
So there are several ways to do this. You could do it inside the same transaction. So get the same. You start the transaction. You do your insertion. You do your log to file, and you got a catch. And in that catch, you roll back if everything didn't happen together. You could just try to save time. And so in the log, you would have to, in what you log to file, you'll have to just add the ID of the Alfresco transaction, for example, so that if there's one of the others that fail, you can just keep them in sync and just with a post action afterwards and fix them. That depends on where you want to save time in the end.
It's event-based now. So if you create a node as event that goes to the audit component, how does it work?
You override as well. Alfresco audit is not transactional either.
So if you would have a state audit transaction.
You know inside the transaction on the brain of overriding.
So it's the same problem for.
It's the same problem as Alfresco audit. Yeah, we haven't fixed that yet.
So you could research in audit logs and create that didn't happen.
If we, yeah, if the audit was transactional, you'd be blocking all the time. The system would be on.
But if you have a compliance stuff, would they accept it?
I mean, Derek can answer that anyway, but I would say it's anything about audit is about risk, right? So what is the risk that you are missing milliseconds of data? Very, very low. Very, very
You
low.
would be okay with having
So in short,
Talking about milliseconds, honestly.
it's the default implementation has two approaches. Most of the writes will roll back with the transaction. Reads won't. Reads we have to audit when the read comes because it's a read-only operation that we're going to write to the database, so that's done separately. But if you're going through a write process, that will roll back if there's a failure. Yeah. Generally speaking, as John says, the risk is normally pretty low. And yeah, you can implement strategies. You could do a post-commit flush, for instance. So you might buffer up all your audit stuff in a separate file and then flush it through. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
So anyway, when you look at your report, it's already out of date.
Actually, there's some cool conversation. I'll bring the mic. Hold on.
I mean, if you say there are 10 documents, and then you go and look, and there are only 0. I mean, yeah, it's true. It's not consistent, but you have to see that when you look at a report, it's out of date.
I was just thinking, when you have an audit, you want to see who did what when, and so forth.
Yeah.
It's not so much that it's out of date, it might be inconsistent.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I have a question actually. But you had to come back to show me the picture of Pentaho. But first, I'll ask you the question. So you say that the problem is that all the data is in the database from Alfresco, and then you have to extract that.
Yeah.
if you look at the work from Francesco Corti, which is the R, he's
where I
yeah.
extracted the picture from.
So it is using the API from Alfresco to extract the data. So what you could do is when you have your AMP that puts everything into Elasticsearch, you could actually wire that. So when you ask Alfresco, it's going to search the information in the Elasticsearch and it's going to return it via Alfresco. And in that case, you could not store anything in the Alfresco database, but everything external. You just change the API to extract the auditing, and then it will work.
Yeah.
It will be a mix of the two things.
So either that, or actually with Kettle, at the time you extract it to put it into Elasticsearch, then you erase it from Alfresco to save the space here, etc. So that's definitely some solution in Alfresco side. That's actually a question I asked at one of the session about the auditing yesterday, if it was actually right now stored in the database in Alfresco, and the answer was yes.
No, just pointing out directions how to fix that.
Yeah. So if someone decided to restart from the Alfresco 5 solution, then that would definitely be a possible direction to take, actually.
Last question?
Sure.
No, last question.
Oh, okay. Not from you. Anyone? So not even the last question. Thanks everyone for coming.